Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent to place into the record remarks made this morning, or the English translation of remarks made this morning by Pope Francis, who addressed the new non-resident ambassadors to the Holy See. And I don't usually comment much on religious matters, but I was very impressed by what the Pope had to say today. And in his remarks, Pope Francis called for a revamping of the global financial system, a system which he pointed out benefits the few, values money over human dignity, and continues to widen the gap between the rich and everybody else. While acknowledging the advances that modern society has made in healthcare, education, technology, and other areas, the Pope expressed his concern for the least amongst us. And this is what the Pope said, and I quote, "We must also acknowledge that the majority of the men and women of our time continue to live daily in situations of insecurity with dire consequences. Fear and desperation grip the hearts of many people, even in the so-called rich countries. The joy of life is diminishing, indecency and violence are on the rise, poverty is becoming more and more evident, people have to struggle to live and frequently to live in an undignified way," end of quote. And then the Pope went on to say in his rather brief remarks, he said that, quote, "One cause of this situation is in our relationship with money and our acceptance of its power over ourselves and our society. The worship of the golden calf of old has found a new and heartless image in the cult of money and the dictatorship of an economy which is faceless and lacking any truly humane goal," end of quote. And then the Pope continued, "The worldwide financial and economic crisis seems to highlight their distortions and, above all, the gravely deficient human perspective, which reduces man to one of his needs alone, namely consumption. Worse yet, human beings themselves are nowadays considered as consumer goods, which can be used and thrown away. We have begun a throwaway culture." And he said also, "Solidarity, which is the treasure of the poor, is often considered counterproductive, opposed to the logic of finance and the economy." And further, quoting the Pope, "While the income," and I hope everybody listens to this, "while the income of a minority is increasing exponentially, that of the majority is crumbling." Let me repeat that. That is what the Pope said just today. While the income of a minority is increasing exponentially, that of the majority is crumbling. This imbalance results from ideologies which uphold the absolute autonomy of markets and financial speculation, and thus deny the right of control to states, which are themselves charged with providing for the common good. A new, invisible, and at times virtual tyranny is established, one which unilaterally and irremediably imposes its own laws and rules. Moreover, indebtedness and credit distance countries from their real economy and citizens from their real buying power. Added to this, as if it were needed, is widespread corruption and selfish fiscal evasion, which have taken on worldwide dimensions. The will to power and of possession has become limitless." And this is from a speech that Pope Francis made today. Well, I think it's important that we listen to the Pope on this issue. Frankly, I have strong disagreements with the Catholic Church on issues of women's rights, issues of gay rights, and a number of other issues. But on this issue of what is happening economically around the world, the power of financial markets, the growing gap between the very rich and everyone else, the need for government, for states around the world to step in and protect the dispossessed, the need to understand that money unto itself means nothing unless it is being used in a way which improves the lives of all people. That is a message coming from the Pope which is worth thinking about and discussing. Now, here in the Senate, I hear a lot of criticisms of government, and some of which is certainly justified. And all of us, I would hope, are deeply concerned and embarrassed and disagree with what the IRS did in terms of picking out one political persuasion in terms of tax-exempt status. That's clearly wrong, unacceptable, must be dealt with. But many of my friends attack government day after day when government is trying to do the right thing in protecting middle-class and working families. There are some in the Congress, for example, who believe that government programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid should be significantly cut, or that maybe government shouldn't even be involved in those areas, and they believe that these programs are unconstitutional. Well, if you were to eliminate Social Security and you eliminate Medicare and Medicaid, what happens to tens and tens of millions of people who rely on Social Security for their retirement, especially at a time when many private pensions have been cut severely? If you make cuts or eliminate Medicare for the old, or you undo the Medicare system that we know it and make it into the system that our friends in the House would like to have, what happens to elderly people when they get sick and need health care and don't have the money in their own pockets to pay for that? I will tell you what happens. This year alone, it is estimated that approximately 45,000 Americans will die because they never made it to a doctor on time when they should have made it. Well, if you make major cuts in Medicare, or do you do away with the basic guarantees that Medicare now provides, clearly the number of people who will die will simply increase. If you are 67 years of age and are diagnosed with cancer and Medicare is not there for you, and you don't have a family which has money, what happens to you? Well, some of my Republican friends will say, well, go to charity. Well, charity is not going to be there to provide health care for millions and millions of people. And in terms of health care, what we must point out over and over again, because many Americans don't understand it, our nation is the only nation in the industrialized world which does not guarantee health care to all people as a right of citizenship. And today, although we hope that will change in the very near future, 50 million people have no health insurance. Many others have large deductibles or co-payments which keep them from going to the doctor when they should. On Saturday in Vermont, we have invited the ambassador from Denmark to join us and do a town meeting. And he will explain to us how in Denmark, among many, many other countries throughout the world, they can provide health care to people which is virtually free from out-of-pocket expenses, and yet per capita end up spending substantially less than we do. He will explain to us why the cost of their prescription drugs is substantially lower than it is in the United States. In terms of education, at a time when in my state, the average college graduate in Vermont leaves school some $28,000 in debt, roughly the national average, at a time when hundreds of thousands of young people cannot afford to go to college, and we lose all of their intellectual capabilities and the genius that they might provide for our society, why it is that in Denmark college education is virtually free, including graduate school and medical school. At a time when in our country millions of people are overworked and underpaid, at a time when we work some of the longest hours of any people in the industrialized world, when people in Vermont are working not 40 hours a week, but 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week, people are working not one job, but two jobs, three jobs, trying to cobble together an income, at a time when some employers are hiring people and providing zero vacation time, or maybe, if you're lucky, a week off. How does it happen that in countries like Denmark, people not only get 5 weeks guaranteed paid vacation, but they get another 11 vacation days? In this country, we talk a lot about family values, but if you're a working-class woman having a baby, you'll get some, maybe, if you're working for a large enough employer, the family medical leave may impact, and you may get some time off to have the baby, but you can't stay home very long to take care of your newborn because you're not getting any money coming in. And millions of folks have a baby, they got to go right back to work, put the child in child care when they would prefer otherwise. How does it happen that in countries like Denmark, women get 4 weeks off, fully paid before they give birth, and then months off afterward to stay home with the baby, not to mention 3/4 payment from the government for child care, which we do so poorly about. So, Mr. President, I think it's time that we have a serious discussion about values. And that discussion has got to include whether or not we feel good about the fact that in this country so few have so much and so many have so little. If we feel comfortable with the growing imbalance in terms of income and wealth such that the top 1% owns 38% of the wealth and the bottom 60% owns only 2.3%, and that gap between the billionaire class and everybody else is growing wider. And as the Pope indicated, are we comfortable with a financial system whose goal is not to invest in the productive economy, but to make money for itself, such that the top 6 financial institutions in this country have assets equivalent to some 70% of the GDP of the United States, some $9 trillion, an enormous political power. Are we comfortable? You know, this IRS business that people are talking about on the floor is related to the absurd campaign finance system that we have, by which big money can secretly put hundreds of millions of dollars into the political process. Are we comfortable about a political system when people can make contributions in secret that ends up in the political process and then ends up on 30-second ads on our TV? Money coming from billionaires who don't have to disclose their contributions. So when we talk about values, it is important to assess who we are as Americans and what we believe in. And I believe that most Americans believe that we have got to do a lot better job and focus on the needs of the declining or disappearing middle class, that we have got to create millions of jobs so that our young people do not have outrageously high levels of unemployment, that older people who lose their jobs have nothing to go back to, that we have got to address the issue of high childhood poverty, and that we have got to make sure that, in fact, government works for all of the people and not just the people on top. So, Mr. President, I would just conclude by recommending to the members and to the American people that they examine the remarks made this morning by Pope Francis, which I think raised some very, very important issues. I think there is a lot to be learned from those remarks. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.